and call this meeting to order and get some roll call going.
All right. Jennifer Bonte,
Here.
Sarah Borgard,
Here.
Here.
Melissa Hens,
Here.
Present. All right, let's go ahead and open up any public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone to address the committee on any issue you're on or not on the current agenda. Please observe the time limit of 3 minutes. While the committee encourages input from residents, it may not discuss or act on any issue that is not duly noted on the agenda. Do we have anybody for public comment this evening?
I don't have anybody for public comments. However, I did receive an email today. It is in regards to the zoning changes within parks and conservancies. So if you want to read it, then we can do it at that point, or I can read it now, whichever you prefer.
Let's take care of that when we hit that agenda.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, then, no public comment. We'll move into the report section. Nothing from myself. Does any other committee member have anything to report on this evening?
No.
I do. This is Sarah. My son took part in the Santa. He sent a letter to Santa and he was incredibly thrilled to get a really amazing letter back. Like it was really well written and the program was really well done. So he was super excited. So thank you for that. And then the other one was I had some neighbors asking if there was going to be an ice skating rink put into our neighborhood at all. So they were hoping that there would be one. So if there's any updates on that. And then that is all I had.
Yeah, we also received a very awesome well-written letter from Santa, reminding us that we should probably provide an envelope that is with postage next time. So it was really cool. They went out of their way to get back to us on that. Melissa, do you have anything for Jen? Okay.
No, and it's a little hard to hear Andy when he was talking. We could hear Sarah loud and clear, so I don't know what. Jed, I think you were having a hard time too, weren't you?
Yeah, I had a hard time hearing him.
All right, I'll try and get the microphone a little bit closer.
That's
you.
better.
Thanks. Okay, so we'll move into Parks and Rec Director.
All right, a few things on my end. I can talk to Sarah first. We did not go forward with the ice skating rink over in the neighborhood. 2 reasons. One, we were short on staff pretty much all year, public facilities. Number 2 was the cost of lumber. This last year was incredibly high. I did look into it as I know that we had talked about it. We hope to do it here in the future. There's a number of other things kind of happening within that are hopefully happening on that land or discussions on that land. So we'll have some more opportunities kind of here in the future. But as of this year, we won't have the ice skating rink up.
Where was the location?
So this would be on the Beekner site behind, right behind the current storage building on that site east of Bear Park. We had a tree lighting ceremony. I'd like to thank the chamber. They did a great job getting people involved. I know they had over 100 people on the hike up there. I believe Sarah, Sarah was part of that. I know everything went as planned until I got there, I think. So checked the lights on Tuesday on the tree. They were good. Checked them again on Thursday. Everything worked. And then got up to the event and I did the drum roll and everything. I mean, it was literally like Christmas Vacation where you're like, da, 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 da. I mean, we had 100 people doing a drum roll. Yeah, 100 people doing a drum roll, and went to put the fuses in, and 1 strand came on this side and like 4 on this side. So that was a kind of I mean, for me, it was disheartening. I felt really bad about it. I mean, knowing like we've literally put that tree up every year for since 1971, I guess, and never had a problem with it. So of course it would be this year of all. We have been able to fix the problem as of right now, but we do have some electrical issues with it. We also had 2 of the strands that pulled out. So when I got up there, there were a number of kids kind of running and pulling on the tree. So we have had some good talks with the chamber since then about things that they have to make sure we do, because 2 of the strands were pulled out, but the other one was an electrical issue. We do have an electrical issue. So Nelson Electric is going to go up and take a look at it, but they can't do that until April 14th. So I won't know the costs or anything that kind of goes along with that, but it was a great event outside of all of that. You know, a large number of hikers, families kind of came out for it. So talking with the chamber last week, I went to their chamber meeting and they want to kind of expand on this. So if you have other ideas you'd like to see throughout that day, we talked about a light parade down Mill Creek Parkway. We talked about a few other things within the business community. So if, you know, residents have some ideas of things you'd like to see, I know we talked about a bike parade of some sort. I don't know if that would be a great time for it, as, you know, the weather isn't always the greatest. It was awesome for that day. But, you know, even able to do something for the kids throughout the day. Yeah, like a light parade through there. So it'd be cool. Prior to that, we had our family fun, our fall family turkey hunt in conjunction with the the Middleton Cross Plains School District and the City of Middleton Rec Department. Another free and very successful event. We had 268 families go through or looking for the turkeys, and which was like almost 620 entries total. So it was only about a 2-week span or so of people being able to go out, and Sarah and her family once again did that, I know, because she actually won the prize. So congrats on that. But it just kind of shows that some of these free and you know, family events, to get them out hiking or out in some of our conservancy areas, are something that people are really wanting and or willing to do. And being able to do it in conjunction with the school, but also the City of Middleton, maybe incorporating other park and rec departments into this, could be something that we kind of push for in the future for a lot of these holiday events. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, I agree. And we talked about the Cupid one again. That was in April of last year. So cold. Yeah, it's like we had 2 people, I think, that did that one. So it was, yeah, but I agree. I think we'll do a lot more of them here in the winter. The ice skating rink is up. We've had it up now for about a month, but the weather hasn't really cooperated. And as of right now, just even the outlook, you know, we have a few 40-degree weather days and short staff here in the next week and a half. So it looks like January 3rd is going to be our date to try and start filling that. So we get that out to people. And then lastly, we have taken out 6 ash trees at Bear Park this year. There's 2 more that will be coming out. So if you see trees coming down, that's why they have the emerald ash borer in them. And we'll continue to do our replacement for those trees as they come down. So there'll be 3 more trees added to Bear Park next year. Should get us to at least where we and then continue to expand on that as we move forward.
Was there any, speaking of trees, was there any new damage from the last week's wind that we had?
Yeah, we didn't have more damage in the parks other than Region, you know, which the village doesn't know.
Oh, yeah.
Region had 1 limb that was down. Our issue actually, one of the lights, one of the lenses up on the small diamond came down in the wind and shattered. And then the other one is just trash debris that was all over at Bear Park. But everything to date's been cleaned up for the most part. Hats off to Becky Ward. She actually, before I left, the night before that storm, she said, we should contact the library and make sure they don't put all their paper and stuff out that night. And so I called them quick, because that was what ended up in the pool last time. So
Yeah. Of course, it happens on traffic pickup day.
I know, every time.
It's like every single
time.
Thursday is the most busiest day of the week.
Every time. Right. So outside of that, any questions or comments?
Okay, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. We'll move into, well, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes of November 15th, 2021. If there's anybody out there that so moved.
Yep, I'll make the motion to approve the minutes from November 15th, 2021. Jennifer Bonte.
Thanks, Dan. Is there a second?
I'll second it. This is Sarah.
All right, all in favor, please say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Hi.
And any opposed? All right. Let's move into discussion of possible action regarding Village Cross Plains zoning within the village parks and conservancies. And maybe we'll start with Mike, give us a synopsis of what's going on.
Get you a quick little update here. So the plan commission is currently in review of all the changes to the land use table within the village. And it's been brought up to us a few times that a lot of the village parks, a lot of the village parks and conservancies are zoned the same or are zoned different, but they don't necessarily have the permittable and or allowable uses within that scope. So what we're looking to do, or what the Plan Commission is looking to do, is update that and add a new zone, which is for you. So let me share this map real quick. All right, so Melissa and Jed, are you able to see that now? Good. Okay. So
Yeah, I got it now.
Yeah, okay, so this here, and I apologize, I didn't put this with your packet, but this here is the zoning map for the village. And so what you see in green is considered conservancies. And now the conservancy aspect of all this could either be on public land or private land, just so you understand. It may not be all village owned land, but if it's zoned within the conservancy, there's only a few allowable uses within that area. And then the parks currently are zoned SR4, which is single family residential, and 4, which is normally smaller lots throughout the community. Usually has like dimensional sizes that would allow you to have a home on it. Well, a lot of our parks, whether they be community or even neighborhood, are over 2 acres, which are outside that scope. So the whole plan right now is to have our own zoning code that would allow for uses that are right in line with what people would want to do within those parks. So active recreation within our parks, passive recreation within our parks, but also passive recreation allowable in our conservancy. So just to kind of show where we're at. So can everyone see this? This here is Bear Park. Much more. It's over 10 acres actually. This parcel, which wouldn't be allowable within an SR4. So like the village wouldn't allow someone within the village to put one house on this 10-acre lot. The same with the Beekner property that's next to it. That's 15 acres. So that's the same. So those would all have their own color, which would allow in park areas would be active recreation. And then in our conservancies, those would stay the green color, allowing passive recreation within those areas like hiking, bird watching, all those sorts of things, but not allow for baseball fields or lighting or soccer. I did, when we go through this list a little bit, because I do want you to look at that if possible tonight and kind of go through them with the questions that they have. And we'll get to this one, but the lighting within our conservancies, we need somewhat flexibility due to the Christmas tree holiday light that's on Hickory Hill. So we don't want that to be taken out of our area. So we'll have to discuss that. Are there any questions? You want to kind of go through some of these?
Yeah, if we could. And then, well, the first question that just jumped out to me is, we're focusing on this, anything that's over 2 acres generally?
No, so our parks and recreation would be for all neighborhood parks, or all community parks of any size. So this would be more all village owned land, it would only be PNR. So, even I'm just going like Gowswoods Park, which is a pretty small neighborhood park. Cedar Glen, which is another small, those would all be a different color now. And they'd have to decide what those colors would be. Yeah, to the zone. Sure.
And so that park that's in the middle of Glacier's Edge would have its own kind of category as a park then, because it's not going to be the same as Xander Park. Is that right? And or a neighborhood park, or it could be, but
I mean, we could talk about that. I don't know if you want to go into that much.
yeah.
When you start putting that type of limit on it, what it would come down to is someone would have to come for a conditional use permit, which would be approved by the planning commission. So once you approve whatever, if we do this new park and rec zoning, then if someone wants to bring some type of active recreation to that park, we can do it. It just has to be done by a conditional use permit, which would be submitted to staff and then taken to the plan commission for approval. And I believe the plan commission is actually the final approval on, not any conditional use, even though they will be sent to the board. So all of our parks would be zone P and R rather than single residential 4. you know, it would change to their own zoning code allowing for active recreation. Or allowing, we can go through that list, you know, what they have.
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah, I think I just need to hear what's changing more, or what would potentially change more.
That they didn't really give me on the changes. So like currently SR4 lots, you know, are more, usually SR4 is going to be a residential lot, right? So you're going to come and put a house on it. So there's going to be restrictions on what you can do on that lot. And what this is more doing is putting restrictions on what, more or less on the conservancy areas of what you can't do. Like for instance, we wouldn't want our parks areas to be a zone the same as our conservancy areas. It's, like I said, we talked about active recreation. So active recreation is like ball fields, lights, you know, more of your group settings where you're bringing people in to play sports or any other activity. Whereas conservancies are more passive, which is like trails and hiking, bird watching. Mountain biking is considered that.
That's what I was gonna ask,
So can
yeah.
you still have events there?
You can. So what this chart will do, and I'll show you this chart. So if you go through the packet a little bit here, what this chart will allow for, I'm gonna share this so you can see this well.
Yeah, so it starts on page 5. Or something like that. Okay.
Share this one. There you go. So what this chart does, it says, you know, we have conservation, which is a C. We have rural holdings, which is what the village would, if it's any type of larger lot and it's being annexed into the village, it'll be set in a rural holding setting prior to it being actually zoned into something else. And then it has a parks and recreation, so PR. So if you don't see anything next to it, that means it's not allowed. So if you know, you want to put a duplex on a park and rec lot, that's not allowable under any circumstance at all. It'd have to be sold, they'd have to do a PUD of some sort, and then they'd come back with a plan, or you could do an SID. So if you see, like for instance, single family 35-acre lot, it says C for rural holdings here, that means it's a conditional use permit. So if someone wanted to come in and develop that acreage on rural holdings, of a single family lot on 35 acres, they'd have to go through this whole conditional use process with the plan commission and village board. But as you can see in this first setup here for dwelling unit, we wouldn't allow dwelling units in any of our park and rec setting. Okay. So then if we move to the next one is agricultural land uses. So cultivation, this is where some of the questions came in too. So cultivation, husbandry, on-site agricultural retail, selective cutting, clear cutting. So all of those uses on those parks are either a P, which are conditioned by right, or they are a C, which is conditioned by a conditional use permit. So they'd have to put a permit together to come in, or we would to have to do any of this. So if we want to allow cultivation within our parks and in some of those areas, we would do a C for conditional use permit or a P by right, or we would leave it blank saying you don't want to allow that.
So Mike, this is Melissa. If we're talking about a community garden, if you put a P there, does that mean that there's no permit or anything that anybody needs, but they can just go and put a garden in without any regulation?
Now, by you saying anybody, no, because under Parks and Recreation ordinances, it wouldn't allow that without the direction of the board and or the director. But
Okay.
like if staff wanted to come forward and put a community garden in at Bear Park and it's set up as a P, then yes, it would be allowed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It just feels like the P it's a by right, but it's not necessarily, it's a by right as long as it's in line with all the other ordinances.
Correct. And that's how they're all set up. You would notice there may be an area that this talks to, right? Like it's saying, by right, you're able to do this. However, here's the process. So for instance, even if you're allowed to do single family, this happens quite often. Single family, the lot isn't conforming, so they have to come, it's allowable, so they can do it, but they have to come forward with a specific implementation plan, which is an SIP, to the plan commission for the village board to then approve. So for outside uses. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Um,
So you're looking for input, Joe, speaking of like, what would we want to see?
within our parks.
Right.
You know, more or less. The conservation aspect, I think, is pretty much set, but we can talk, there's a few questions that we have in here. We can go through all of them. I mean, so selective cutting, for instance, that's considered anything 30% of the foliage that's there or less. That I did, you know, like I went through these and tried to make some changes to them, so that I did by right. So like if we went in to work on this conservancy area, we wouldn't need a conditional use permit from the plan commission to actually do any selective cutting. So under 30% of that foliage. Now clear cutting is like a whole new thing. So you're looking at anything over 30%, right, to be cut. The question that I had within here is more along the lines of, so we already have a plan in place for most of our conservancy areas. And staying within that plan is more like the invasive species aspects to things to get out. So does that count towards the foliage, the 80, you know, above 30% of the foliage that's there? If that's so, and I have to come to a conditional use permit to the plan commission on that, like it goes against our current practices. So that was where I had a question. You know, what we want to see.
So Mike, oh, go ahead.
Could it just be set as selective cutting of native species?
Selective cutting of native species.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
non-native?
Well, I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
like you'd
Yeah.
want the selective cutting of natives, but then the clear cut
Right.
of the
Of
non-natives.
non-invasive or of invasives.
Non-natives, yeah.
Are some invasives native? Or is it just by default, you're gonna find that?
Well, technically, I guess we should be saying introduced.
Yeah.
So it's introduced or native. Invasive is kind of the biased term.
Yeah, that's a good call.
I'll add that to the.
So what triggered this on the agenda? Like what
Yeah.
blocker was in the planning commission that they said, crack this open and we can't get past this, so we need a solution from Parks and Rec?
It's not that we can't get past it. It more or less puts what the current practices are into something that people can see. So you've had these questions, or someone has had these questions before, right? About what's allowable and what's not within our parks and open space. And this just more or less puts a stamp on it of like, yep, this is the way it's set up.
Mhm.
So that if we have changes to it, or if there needs to be changes, this is a good time to do it. So the village's comp plan calls for this to be done as, you know, as practices are happening and things are going on, for zoning to be changed to show that that's what you're trying to do. And so that's what kind of, you know, I think the comp plan was done in 2018 and just finally getting to this point of trying to make it so, and it makes it a lot easier for staff, right? So like if we have a question regarding clear cutting, we know we can go to this and be like, oh, well, we can do it,
Sure.
but we need to get a conditional use permit for it, or bill, or, you know, let's say it's private lot as well. It could be private lot conservancy, and someone needs to come in and get a conditional use permit to do all the clear cutting. So just
Yep.
kind of puts things into perspective.
Did you say there was a public comment or somebody submitted something and it's relative to this agenda item?
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I read those first? Sure. So Dory Thomas sent an email. She lives at 2033 Continental Lane. She said, I think we should split parks and conservancy areas because their purposes are different. Parks are for community enjoyment, while conservancy areas should remain wild and humans should not be trampling through them, disturbing flora and fauna. Regarding BR2, I do not think we should allow cultivation in parks or conservancy areas. Agriculture and private property can be used for cultivation. Regarding BR3, I think the only cutting that should be done in conservancy areas for the removal of invasive species and fire control. Regarding VR4, a community garden in a park would be wonderful, but will require fencing and a water supply. Gardeners should be charged a fee to support the cost. The gardens at UW are a good example of this, although they have issues with turkeys running rampant and leaking water pipes costing them money. I would gladly sign up for a plot. Regarding VR5, I think a CUP should be required for recreational activities in parks. There should not be any recreational activities in conservancy areas other than hiking or cross-country skiing along a trail to minimize damage to natural areas. In comment VR6, asking about allowing camping in both parks and conservancy areas, or is it asking about removing the restriction on camping on commercial land? I don't think we should allow camping in either parks or conservancy land. I would support if the village is built a campground and proper toilets and waste management in an area that considers the noise level, privacy, and fire protection for neighboring properties. If a commercial developer wants to build a campground, the same consideration should be required. I've attached a separate document with my concerns about opening up parking conservancy areas to camping. But I didn't see it attached to it. So those are
Cool.
It looks like camping is specifically mentioned on page 9 of the packet,
Mhm.
conditional use for all parks and conservancies, more or less.
Let's go back. Let's just go through the document and then you can agree or disagree more or less on what you think or with the questions that I have. So selective cutting, is everybody okay with or I should say, out of any of this, do you have any recommendations of changes to page 4? Let's just do that. Otherwise.
Mike, is there currently cultivation happening in any of the conservancies?
Not in the conservancies, no. The cultivation aspect that and it says community gardens, but in my sense, we do cultivate the community garden, which is in a park. It is Xander Community Nature Park, but it is a park. So that's why that's red and it has a C next to it currently, as I didn't want to have any, I didn't want to, obviously it's not going to be by right. And I see that he has a P by conservation. I would see rural holding allowing P. I would say the other ones should probably be at least a C.
Does that, well, I was gonna think about like in a conservancy, is that including like if people are going to like collect seeds and like, I'm wondering if that's why it's included as P.
Could be. Is that part of?
Cultivation in general is like you have to be actively manipulating the landscape to get whatever it is. So like wild foraging, I don't think would be covered by cultivation. Which is good.
Yeah.
Or is there are they doing any restoration on our conservancies where they might be looking at planting native plants in order to work on restoration? I guess that's another consideration.
Yeah, what used to happen, Hickory Hill used to be farmed and actually was mowed and cultivated at that time to try and keep the weeds down prior to us restoring with seed. That could be.
It's really what your plans are and to try and stay out of your way.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I don't really see an issue with having a conditional use permit though for something like that. If we're going to do it, we normally already have plans to do it. But if you feel that like collecting seed is part of cultivation, then I would definitely want to keep that as a P. Because you do that every year. So
Then
I'll ask what this, what this is. These are good questions though. Like I didn't think about the seed collection. I'll check in on that.
I looked up the meaning of cultivation, the act of cultivating land. And it's growing, raising, rearing, farming, planting, sowing.
Yeah, so planting.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's collecting seeds, if that would, unless you're then planting them, that would be cultivation, but I think it's more the act of planting rather than gathering.
Of harvesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how, yeah.
Harvesting would be different than cultivating. Yeah.
I'll ask on that. I'll ask what, what their intentions were. Or what his intentions are in regards to that. Report back or send it to the plan commission for them to discuss further.
They can define each of those terms. I mean, if you don't want to leave it ambiguous for somebody to argue against, or, to not argue, but, just make it crystal clear,
Right.
right?
And, which is like the perfect form of stuff. Can we go back to that map just for a second? I just want to look at where the RH35 properties are. I see there's one down here.
Yeah. So this property here is this one here, and then also down here on Blue Road.
Oh,
So those are both in private, on private lots, which would be pretty normal. I know, like, for instance, this whole area here was RH30. This one here is as well, but this was prior to development, so.
okay. Okay,
Makes sense?
yeah, yeah. So going down the list still, if that's the strategy. Husbandry, rearing animals is permitted, they had a permit on rural holdings, which is in this case impacting private land apparently.
Which you would need anyways. Yeah.
Right, yeah, it was in it.
Mhm.
Same thing as on-site, yeah. Selective cutting, and so again, I think what Sarah's comments were,
yeah.
maybe just redefine or reword them to be native and introduced, maybe to like try and clarify what you would have to go and get permit for. So it's just easier.
Well, I think these three are currently by right. So if you're selective cutting, you wouldn't need approval necessarily there. And we would want to keep that for all of our parcels due to, like, for instance, the Emerald Ash Borer, right? That took away 30%, which it did in some parks. Then we want to keep this. So those would all be by right.
Do we need to change the percentage? You think?
I think that's actually standard. So anything above 30 would then be considered clear cutting, which is next. And clear cutting, I think anything above all those, I think once again, we could add the land, the discussion about clear cutting, introduce species. One of those are permitted currently. Community garden. B or C?
That's a tough one. I feel like P would be the way to go just for the village aesthetic and sort of kind of our identity. We want to encourage these things from happening instead of putting roadblocks in front of them. But I am not aware of any community garden issues that we've had as a village, as far as like any garden space, but spots being designated that weren't maintained properly or caused issues in some way, shape, or form. And so if anybody's aware of any of those circumstances, I'd like to hear it so we can just figure out if the conditional use permit is the way to go. So then
I don't think
we'll process. Go ahead, Melissa.
I don't think it's a bad idea to have input by the planning commission or recommendation by the Parks and Rec committee if a garden's going to go in. So, if we have C, conditional use permit, it's not saying we can't have them. It just is saying that there's a bit more of a process to go through if one's going to be established.
Yeah, so if it's in a Parks and Recreation district, zoning district, they would have to come and get approval from staff or start the approval process through staff with a conditional use permit sent to plan commission and village board.
And that's as by right. Or that would be like under if we switch it to the city.
Yeah, if we switched it, if you switch it. Right now, technically, it would be by right. Like you could start a community garden, providing staff and or this is something normally we would take to the village board anyways, right? Like we did on the other one. But that's where this kind of lines like I said earlier about staff, it gives them direction on where to go with some of these things, so. So it's good to hear what you would like to see. As a community.
So if somebody wanted to start a community garden, they really just contact Parks and Rec to get some sort of tacit approval or.
Mhm.
And then garden away. I kind of like that just because I think it's ease. Like we want to encourage people like urban agriculture and to like grow their own food. And, I don't know. It's like, I don't
I mean, I said that as a P, but I'd be open to it being a C as well, just so that we keep form, like, you know. The one big thing about community gardens is they clean up after the fact, and that can be an issue. Even when people pay for lots, they struggle to come and clean their plots up when they come, so it can become an issue for staff. Which it was this year. But, I mean, it's minimal, for them. I mean, it's not, but if we had 8 of them up around the village, then it may be. So.
So it sounds like Mike is suggesting.
I'm not trying.
I know. Well, see, we wanna make sure
I mean,
we're-
I like the idea of keeping it the P, like what you said, the encouraging of it. I would be shocked if we suddenly
So-
had.
So if somebody said, I'm gonna start a community garden, I'm gonna put it right next to your neighborhood, and I'm gonna let it get weedy, and I kind of was
Well,
into it originally, but then I'm not really into it. And the fruits, like tomatoes, start falling off, and the bees start coming, and the animals start coming, and I just kind of ditched the whole project. You're okay with that?
Well, I
You know,
guess I think, I mean, so there aren't any guidelines for, I mean, I guess I would rather see us have it set up as to, these are the guidelines for having a community garden, so that,
So that could be something we set up as a community.
yeah, I almost would rather see that, because I don't know that even, like, the same thing could happen with the conditional use permit. So,
Yeah, the nice thing about a conditional use permit though is that it can be pulled from that.
That's what I was
right, but I mean,
wondering.
they're
What-
still going to just walk away from it, right?
Right, it just, there's more of a process to it, so usually, I mean, I would say, like, they had to go through, do the homework per se, had to get the materials, you know, had to meet with staff on how it was going to be completed.
Yeah,
And then.
but wouldn't you still
and then
do
it
that?
allows people like you to ask questions like, is it really good to put it next to the playground? Let's just say,
Oh.
Or if I move or something, and I'm
Yeah.
just like, ditch the whole thing.
But again, isn't
Yeah.
staff doing that? Like, kind of,
We've never had anyone.
well, right, but I
other
guess,
than
I guess
watching
I'd
us.
want to know more of the procedure of what it would mean to go to you.
Usually, so how the other one was set up is,
Yeah.
it's usually a nonprofit group that's looking to start something. It's not just a.
Right.
ask. During the process, I was trying to find land that was suitable for it, and then getting water sources to it, getting a management process, and then with them, we actually did memorandum of understanding at the time, so that we knew how much work it was going to be for us, how much work was going to be for them. If they wanted to put a shed up on it, there was a bunch of other things that happened, so it wasn't just someone trying to plot plots in our parks.
Yeah.
They're all considered. community gardens.
So it sounds like we have 2 options where if we kept it a P, we'd like to see some sort of a process implemented guidelines, or we keep it C and then that is just going to create the process, really.
Right.
Well, I know that there used to be an organization that like helped Parks and Rec with planting around signs or doing like flower stuff. I mean, like Christian Wood.
Yeah, she was a first ever master gardener for our science, yeah.
And so like this would then apply to any future people who just want to help, because then they would have to go through the conditional use.
No. Not the community garden, the actual, we could look up like what that.
Sure. It sounds like as long as the process isn't, whether we go P or C, we're gonna have to develop a process. And so it sounds like as long as the process isn't over the top and is reasonable, that like,
Sure.
we just want to make sure that people are just jumping through the hurdles so that they demonstrate that they really. want
They're committed to
it.
it.
They're committed to it. So as long as we don't make it too intense, I have no problem switching it up to the C. And would there be a fee associated with the conditional use permit, or could it be free as long as they go through the process?
Yeah, it's on the village board of commission too.
Okay. Gotcha.
So like
So
in front of park signs, I wouldn't say that that's a community garden. I mean,
It seems to me that it's really about whether we want to give up the control over, and sorry for those words, but it's either that it's under Park and Rec's umbrella, or we're basically passing it off to Planning Commission and Village Board. So I think if we wanted this to stay in the Parks and Rec world, so that we can be making those decisions, then it stays P, but then we choose to implement some guidelines.
Yeah, that's well put, Melissa.
Because if it goes
Well,
the other way, then we don't really have final say on anything.
Right, right. Well, what are everybody's thoughts on that? Would you prefer the conditional use permitting and it up to zone, or sorry, plan and the board, or would you prefer to come up with a system where it stays in Parks and Rec?
Will it end up going to the board anyway, no matter what?
yeah, I mean, most likely, yes, at least for discussion. I don't know about any action. If there's not a conditional use permit, it would only be
I mean-
on an action item if they ask for it to be.
The thing I like about the conditional use permit is, number one, you don't have to have a whole group of guidelines and try to think of every scenario. You do it on a case by case basis. And in this case, there's probably very few gardens that are going to go up, and you set the rules for each one based on the conditional use of it, as opposed to trying to set one up for everything. So I like it in that sense that, you know, it's designed for each individual one, knowing that we probably won't have a bunch of them.
Okay. I think I'm leaning towards conditional use more than by right. But we would have no control over whatever process that is.
And that was one of the things that swayed me too, not having control over the process. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, you know, if this is something that's going to go for a conditional use permit, I'm guessing that the board's going to ask us for our input no matter what anyway. I think they're going to look at it and go, well, this is a parks thing. Why don't we get their input? And then once we have their input, then we'll make a decision on it. So I don't think it would take us out of the process. I think it just makes it easier because you can do this on a case by case basis instead of creating a policy to cover every scenario when you're only likely to have very few of these actually come up.
Yeah,
That works for me.
So everyone's okay with that?
I think so, as long as we make just a very clear list for anyone who wants to do this, how they would go about doing it, because I think navigating village government is really tricky. Sure. When you're not used to it.
Sounds good.
okay. Keep heading down the list. So market garden, I think that makes sense. Conditional use, indoor, conditional use, outdoor open space, institutional. What exactly does that entail?
Outdoor open space, institutional, it would be, so this is so all of them, so indoor institutional, they have on their conditional use permit. Outdoor open space would be, like a group or like a so like allowable uses within parks, like a soccer club or a baseball club or some sort like that. That's what you're saying.
So would the stingrays fall under that
Stingrays, although.
outdoor
yeah,
open
they
space?
could fall under that as well.
I'm just going down the list, not really seeing anything that sticks out to me as
So active outdoor recreation for institutional uses was one
Mhm.
that we had in there for conditional use permit. And this is like when those groups want to come and use our facilities, as like having a planned, set time that they're wanting to use it and or like for the pool is a big one, but we already have a memorandum of understanding and or agreement that's set forth, so that would supersede this. So you don't need a conditional use permit for it. But other groups that coming in may not have that agreement, so it'd be good to have some type of paperwork set up for them.
Would this include like using their park for a cross country?
Correct. So we have a special event permit currently for that, but it would, having a CUP on this, or having a, I'm sorry, CUP on this, would make it so that Bill knows that, or the administrator would know that there has to be a conditional use permit for that group to come and use our facility and be pointed to a special event permit. Okay, I think those are good.
Yep. we'll go with that.
And Mike, you see that as the best option?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, this is a document that doesn't change. The special event permit might change, but this document won't change once it's in place until they do an amendment. So at least points them in a direction, staff in a direction, and or the community.
Got it.
Yeah, the rest I don't have any questions about it.
That's pretty straightforward. Looks like we need to talk about this camping situation.
So that's a camp, yeah, so if we go down to page 5, campground. Currently, so what that means by camp, we don't allow camping in any village parks and or conservancies currently. The Ice Age Trail does allow for people to hike, to camp on their portion of the trail, but only on a portion of the trail that's in the town of Berry. So that's the only area that you can actually camp within the village or within the trail system throughout the village. What this means is a campground. So park and rec, meaning that if you wanted to say that you wanted to put a campground down in Xander Park, you have to come for a conditional use permit to do so. I don't necessarily know if we want to open that door or not, like to even think about allowing it. Or
Does that mean that you wouldn't, that you can't do it like a one weekend?
correct. Yeah, right now, the way it's set up is you can't do any camping in any of our parks or conservancies.
Don't we have a campsite up on the hill at in Elmwood Circle?
Yeah, that's on top of,
Not the village.
Not the
Maybe
village.
private. So that's where the conservation comes into play. So that land says conservation, right?
Yep.
So that person, if they do have that, they would need a conditional use permit to allow it up there.
We don't really have I just think about like, we used to put all these like mountain bike races where everyone camped. We don't really even have a space that's big enough for something like that, do we?
I don't think so either. Even like Bear Park would be your best large space, right?
Well, I mean, technically the field,
Yeah, you'd have fields, but like, no showers, no necessarily running water for that.
well, I mean, you could bring big porta potties.
Yeah, you could bring in porta potties. We have some porta potties. Yeah,
Where are the closest camp? We got Fescue Park, right?
there's a campground out off of Airport Road. So on the S curves there to the right, there's like 20 lots for camping. They have it all set up with electrical to each site,
Oh, yeah,
things like that.
it doesn't seem necessary.
Agreed. I think we just
Well,
take
that's
all
like-
those Cs off.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Well,
Well,
like we have Blue Mountain State Park not far away. I don't know.
Right.
it'd be
Or at least-
cool.
right,
When,
I mean, the only
Ice
thing I
Age
think
Trail
about is,
coming
like,
right through and-
Some of our club, like our, like scouts and things like that, do feel a little,
Yeah,
or
like-
have an outdoor movie night where everybody camps there.
there's not really a lot of space.
No.
Unless you do like by our neighborhood, but not
I don't think people would be real excited about.
There's a
having
whole
bunch
lot
of
to
people.
talk about if you want to house an overnight campground movie night within the
Yeah,
village. I
there's so
think
many things
there's
going on.
public safety, there's public health.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, I think, a lot of things. I'm not saying it wouldn't be
Take it out to a
fun.
movie night real quick, and then go home.
Yeah, right.
Or what is it, the oak, right off of the Ice Age Trail, you said, there's like an oak, like a
Mhm.
grove or something up there that I think has at least one campsite.
Yeah,
So there is,
All the way at the end.
yeah.
So, yeah, at the end
like you kind of like go back in and you can see
Yeah.
the sites. So there's camping available around.
Right.
That's the only side I'm aware of, but it's still like walking distance.
Yeah, I don't know. If you guys talking about what-
It's on Lewis, it's the entryway on Lewis, right? You go up that.
Uh-huh.
and there's a
kinda
loop
like-
at the very top of the hill.
Yep, so you get up, and like you get the loop, and if you kind of went to the left of the loop, you would ultimately get to the tree, like the lighted tree, like off of Hickory. But if you went off to the right, there's like this grove area. It's like its own little contained.
This, is it right here?
I feel like that might be it,
So,
yeah.
so this, if you were to go all the way up through here, and then back into the Anderson Preserve, back through here, this area back here, people have camped in, but this isn't a town of Berry,
Oh,
so it is allowable.
Yeah, and it's like, it's signed.
yeah,
Yeah.
Where
It's
are
all-
you
and it's-
talking
it's
about
all
that
on
there's-
Ice Age Trail. I don't-
the
maybe
one
talking-
campsite that Andy and I were
Yeah.
talking about.
So is it, if you go up on this?
Is it on Circle? Oh, no. I think Andy and I were talking about what you're talking about. There's signage up there too.
Yeah,
Is this
it was
Lewis?
like a Eagle Scout project.
Uh-huh.
So if you take the Lewis Street, right, you come up and around, come up, go up through here. And then trail keeps going here.
Uh-huh.
We might be talking about the same place. I thought it was on that.
Kind of
field
shoots,
right there in the-
shoots around here,
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
and then you can either go this way. I mean, you can. see
Is that good on
the trail
Hickory?
section too. But then down here is where the camping takes place.
Maybe that's
And
it.
then you just go through the field.
It's just, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's probably right.
That's
I think
it,
what
yep.
we're thinking.
That's,
Okay.
yeah.
So take C even away for, I think leave it in for rural holding since we don't hold anything, but people would want, like, for instance, like we were talking before. I mean, you take it out for all of them,
I like the idea of leaving it for conservancies.
leaving it,
Yeah.
you want to allow camping in conservancy areas?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think
But you
maybe for the
say that-
rural holding,
Yeah.
I would prefer to just have nothing for parks and recreation land and conservancies. Rural holding, Mike, I'd be open to hear what you have to say about that because that feels a little different. But the other two, I would say no.
Yeah, you're probably right on that, right? Conservancy, we don't want to like leave a trace and having people camp there, it's just definitely cause problems with that for sure.
Or if there was a situation and law enforcement had to be called in, I mean, all of those emergency access points.
Yeah.
Well, and camping usually means campfires.
Sure.
Right. I mean, currently, right now, this area here is rural holding. That's in the village. The Rips own this property and they also own this property here. And this part's in the village and this part is not. So technically, this would allow for rural, them to camp up there. And I don't know if that's a good idea or not.
So we just take it all out completely
I think
and just
so.
be done with it.
You guys are okay with that?
I'm okay with it.
I agree. Take it all out.
All right. It is out. I think the rest of them pretty straightforward. Page 6,
Offsite parking,
yeah. So parking is the only one, I got a question about. And the only thing I said was, I don't know, the conditional use permit's probably good. The only place I've known that this to happen would be the lot that is across from the bowling alley, the village owned parking lot that's across from bowling alley, it's its own lot. Let's see. So, I mean, these probably don't come, like, happen very often, but this being its own lot, would technically be, I mean, they would have went for an SIP or conditional use permit anyways to put this parking lot in, but it just kind of allows for parking if we have a park and rec lot, which this would have been at the time, because it's part of Xander Park, then they would have had to have a conditional use permit to put in a full parking lot. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep, definitely in favor of that conditional use.
I think it's funny that we have a conditional use permit on a heliport
Yeah.
in rural
Rural
holding.
holdings, yeah, and so the ones that aren't in red at all, that was done prior to us getting it, and I don't know if that's like closer to state statutes, like we don't really have a whole lot of say over that at that time, or you know, if that's what they've done, if that's relatable to the rest of the zoning that's happening within the village. I'm guessing that's the part of it. Yeah, large solar or large wind farms are all reported in that as conditional use permits.
Yeah, if anybody sees anything
Yeah,
just jumping out to you, let us know. I don't really see anything on page 6 that I'm concerned about.
page 7. This was, let's see, non-residential accessory structure. This we'd want to, for parks anyways, we'd want this to be a P, mainly because, you know, we have like our Toro that's in a garage down in the Bear Park. That's only an accessory structure for that. It only stores our vehicles in it. Same with Bear Park has a couple of storage units next to the ball diamonds that are used to store rakes and all those sorts of things. So we want to keep that as a P if possible. And then oh yeah, recreational facilities. Obviously we want P for park and rec, but I think for conservation, we'd actually want to leave it blank. Not allowing swing sets, tree houses, all those sorts of things up on our conservancy lands. Yeah, swimming pools, basketball courts, we don't want that up on.
Mhm.
So leave those blank. Everyone's good with it?
Sounds good.
And solar energy, we talked about. Yeah. Good. And then page 8. So just temporary uses.
Can I ask, it's kind of a strange, like, is it like bat houses? You see those, does that fall on anything?
No,
Okay.
you'd be able to allow that.
Okay, good.
Um, Temporary uses within our park districts, I don't couldn't really think of anything that we use currently that's temporary, you know, like. I had sent an email back to him saying like on this one, I really would have to think about this. He more or less wondered if there were any current uses within our parks that allow for temporary land use within that, and I was like, I don't think there's anything different that we haven't talked about already above. So I was fine with the table that he set forth here. Everyone else is.
Are
Well,
any of these
potentially-
things,
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Melissa.
are any of these things going to be impacted, not just the temporary use, but if and when we get the structure in Xander Park? As far as
Yeah. I
land
don't
use or
think-
gathering?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering about temporary shelter structure. Like that would be maybe for like if they're renting the park or something.
Yeah, and that'd be more like a tent, you know, like you offer, you know, if someone wants to put up a large tent for a wedding, or the Lions have put them up before for a community garden, some stuff like that, so I was thinking. someone's renting the park and facilities, if they're putting up a tent, they tell us about it. Even if it's on our form, so I think it's fine to just not have them go through an extra step, right?
Yeah. Anything else on any other pages people want to discuss?
For this, I'll pass this document on to Sonia, our current, she's our newest planner for Vanderwall and Associates, with a couple of comments, just with the changes, but also the introduced species that I think is key for this. And I'll make sure the seed collection aspect of cultivation is part of that. Then it'll pass on to Plan Commission for review as well.
Sweet. Thanks for all of that.
Let's see, actually, so you might want to make a motion
To just approve or make a
and approve
recommendation.
with changes that were discussed.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve changes to the Village of Cross Plains zoning within village parks and conservancies. Is there a second on that?
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Let's move into number 3. This one, discussion and possible action regarding the park development policy for new developments within the village cross plans.
All right, so at the last Park and Rec meeting that we had back in November, you had made a recommendation to the village board to begin visioning for new park improvements once 51% of phase 1 lots are sold, and then begin construction for new park improvements. That should begin once 100% of phase 1 lots are sold. Since then, we had a staff meeting and got a lot of feedback from your recommendation, and they wanted to, staff had recommended, and or village board members have recommended that we make some changes to this. And what they thought was it should be more related to state statute, right? And because that is really what our timeline is and where our issues come into play. So what was recommended is that visioning for new park improvements begins no later than 3 years from when the first dollar was collected within said development. And construction for new park improvements begins no later than 6 years from when the first dollar was collected within said development. I think this keeps us pretty close to in line to 51 to 100% that you discussed earlier. At least it's just a different metric used to make sure that these improvements are happening in a timely manner. So I put this back on the docket for you tonight to kind of think about if you're okay with those changes to that, and for this to move. If so, the recommendation to that.
So my first question goes to what if, we don't hit a threshold of lots being sold and contributions to the pot of money for a community park at 3 years or 6 years? Like there's no guarantee there's always.
There aren't, and it's also, it's, earlier, once 100% of phase 1 is gone, those lots are sold, that may be past the 7-year mark.
Yeah.
Right, because development can take a long time. Statutorily, we have to spend that money within those 7 years, so that's why the metrics are used there rather than, hopefully within 3 years, right, we have 100%. That'd be ideal, and you're already doing a vision then with that 100%, and can move into construction. It's more of later, so you have that time frame of like not going past that date, so that you don't lose out on those funds rather than which we were doing. Going to get close to the Meridian money.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I mean, I actually thought like the 6 years seemed really long. Just think about somebody moving in with a 5-year-old and now their kid is 11,
And
you
it
know.
is, the one thing I will say though is that you need funds in there to actually build it out. So,
Right.
Depending on how the village does their development moving forward with these parks, if they ask the developer to put them in out, but if they don't, we have this model. It's
Yeah.
ideal to-
Mike, can we combine these two and can we say that visioning for new park improvements begins once 51% of phase one lots are sold and no later than 3 years from when the first dollar was collected? And do that for both?
Right.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
we
that's what I would
combine-
like to see, because I thought about how like my neighborhood was done in a very, like 4 years, I think it was done. So that's why I was kind of hesitant about the 6 years.
Well, and could you, so like, it sounds like, so both can all come to the table, but can you do it like the earlier of? I mean, does
Right.
that work? Does that logic work? Like the earlier 51% of the phase one lots sold, or 3 years from the first dollar, like, is there a
Whatever
threshold
first.
you hit first, knowing that the conservative statute is where you cannot go past that,
Yeah, I
right?
think
So.
that'd be okay. I think the one area that we'll run into issues with would be the construction part of it. So since, let's say 100% of phase one lots are sold, what their big hangup was there is that we're not gonna have the funding to actually provide the amenities wanted and needed within that park at 100%. But I think the 51% to start, make that your start revisioning and or 3 years, whichever comes first, I think is good. And then 6 years max. So if once 6 years hits, we start construction, the RFP for proposals to construct that project no matter what. So you hope that you hit that earlier, right? That it's built out before those 6 years, but if it doesn't, you start that construction.
Well, I think if we hit that, if we have that 51% in there for the beginning of the visioning, at least I think it's getting that process started. Yeah.
Mike, I
Yeah,
couldn't hear
really-
what you said when you were talking about your concern. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so my concern is, let's say we hit 100% of phase one lots.
Yeah.
And we hit that within 4 years, right? And now phase two is started up. We don't have the funding to actually bring in the amenities that are visioned, like because the visioning session is gonna take place on the money for all the lots, right? You know what I mean? So if 51, if we start the visioning at 51%, you have a couple visioning sessions for what you want. You're not gonna have the funding to construct the project at the end of phase one. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess so, but are you envisioning like that all of these phases could take 10, 12, 15 years sometimes spread out? So
It could. And then the whole the thought process there is, okay, you have a threshold, you hit 6 years, whatever funding and or visioning you have is when you have to start that project. So it gives staff that sign saying, hey, we need to start this project. 6 years, we have 70% of the funding. This is what we're going to build. Like, does that make sense?
yeah, it does. I guess in my head, for whatever reason, I was just thinking that each phase would have its own park space.
Oh, no,
That
no.
wouldn't
it's all the
necessarily
same.
be-
Yep. Phase one and phase two of those spaces are all the same. Yeah, same funding.
Got it.
Used for the same park. Yeah. And that's where they had an issue with, is the village board isn't going to borrow money, which we talked about. The village board's not gonna borrow money to get paid back later when they don't know when that later is. Right? So,
It just seems so sticky because on the one hand, even at 6 years, we potentially aren't gonna have the money to build the park.
I'd be surprised, I think, if we didn't. I mean, and honestly, we've obviously hit 51% of a phase. So depending on how big these phases are, right? Like, that's a big part of it too. But I think it'd be more about deciding that as a committee at what you feel the park needs first and or needs, right now. Like, I think that's more of what will be kind of kicked in. And you don't really want to undercut yourself on what the project should really be overall, if you don't have to be. Now, I get what you're saying too, Sarah, like, I'm moving this community and now I get that the visioning part was like 6 and, we're constructing at 10, it's like that vision would have been different. Which could be an issue
Well-
too, but it's- I think the right formula for all this is to ask the developer to build out the park prior to anything else happening. I really do. I
Yes.
think that's like the best phase to go. Have your visioning session with the developer. The committee can have it with them. I don't think that would be an issue at all, even though we don't have anyone living there. The committee has that visioning and they put it all in, prior to any houses going up.
Yep.
That's what One Key has been doing on the last few of theirs, and they actually get way more than what you'd expect, like what we would be able to do, because the construction, they're already doing all the road work, they're already doing curb and gutter, so they have the expertise and the people there, and they just design out the park and do it that way, so. That's what I'm pushing, but for the ones that we don't have and the ones that don't decide to do that, we need something in place, so that's.
So hopefully eventually this will be a moot point.
Right,
Yeah,
that's idea, that would be ideal. So,
so I'm comfortable supporting 3 and 6 years. Do we want to combine the 51% of phase 1 with the and or whatever comes first, 3 years for visioning?
we could,
I would really like to. I have a bit of a
Sure.
sore spot on that.
Well, let's do it then. Let's-
well, and I had said, like, that's why this came about, right? Like, we need something so that this doesn't happen, so. All right, so you made a motion, Andy?
Yeah, I make a motion to approve, so visioning for new park improvements begins no later than 51% of phase 1 lots being sold, or 3 years from when the first dollar was collected, whichever comes first. And then we can keep it as construction for new park improvements begins no later than 6 years from when the first dollar was collected within the said program. You have a second there?
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Excellent. What's the likelihood this is gonna come back to us?
And like,
Yeah.
at least, but it's good having a discussion, I guess. Yes.
Also, I believe that the park, at Glacier's Ridge is gonna be coming before plan in January. Just a heads up. Possible. Should. Be. I'll get there. Okay. Well, that takes us to adjournment. Anyone so move?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, thanks, Jen.
I'll second.
All right, thank you, Jen. We stand adjourned.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Jen.
Good night.
I don't know. All right, hold on a second.